Welcome to Sriramshan Physics Pilot. So during this lockdown period, students are not able to go to school. So for that purpose, we make some videos. It will really helpful to the students to understanding the physics. So in this session, we are going to discuss about the first lesson in electrostatics. So in this video, we just going to discuss the introduction and the historical background of electrostatics. So in introduction, electromagnetism, it plays the major role and it is the most important branches of physics. We are having so many branches, and especially electromagnetism plays the essential role. So the name indicates that the electromagnetism, that is the electricity and the magnetism, both two words are combined to give the electromagnetism, the name. And you know about electricity. So electricity is nothing but the movement of electrons or the electric charges. And the magnetism is nothing but the interaction among the electrons. And now coming to the lesson, that is electrostatics, it is nothing but the branches of electricity. In electricity, we are discussing about the movement of electrons, and in this case, electrostatics, the name indicates statics is nothing but the charges at rest. So electrostatics is nothing but the branch of electricity which deal with the stationary charges. So we are living in 21st century. So in this century, technological development due to understanding of electromagnetism. So we have to understand the electromagnetism. With the help of this electromagnetism, we are enjoying today's technology. So nowadays, forces. So we experience lots of forces in everyday life. They are all said to be electromagnetic in nature, except one force, that is said to be the gravitational force. So except gravitational force, all the other forces are electromagnetic nature. It is discussed by Newton. We know that forces, gravitational force, tension, friction, and normal forces. These are the forces. They are all independent with each other, and they are being a separate natural force. They are said to be a separate natural forces. So natural forces, that is gravitation, tension, friction, and normal forces, they are all independent and they are a separate natural forces. So due to these discussions, in these discussions, we conclude that except gravity, all the forces arises from electromagnetic forces within the atoms. So we discussed this electromagnetic nature with two examples. In first example, that when an object is pushed, the atoms in our hand interact with the atoms in that object. So this interaction is due to electromagnetic in nature. Similarly, in another examples, when we stand on the earth's surface, so look at the diagram, a person standing on that earth's surface, two forces acts here. So one is said to be the gravitational force and another one is said to be normal force. This gravitational force acts downwards and the normal force acts upwards. So where we'll get the normal force, that we are going to discuss. This normal force gets because of this electromagnetic nature or the interactions. How? That is, it arises due to the electromagnetic interaction of atoms on the surface of the earth with the atoms that present in the foot of the person. So from the above discussion, it is clear that understanding electromagnetism is very essential to understand the universe in holistic manner. So now we are going to discuss about the historical background of electric charges. So historical background means that 2000 years before, Greeks noticed that when the amber rod and with the fur. And another examples also we are going to discuss. So in the first example, the amber, it is nothing but the rod that is formed from resins of a fossilized tree. So it is rubbed with the fur. So look at the diagram. So what happens when the amber rod is rubbed with the fur? Amber attracts the small pieces of leaves and dust. So the Greeks noticed that amber rod have a special property, and this property is said to be, it becomes that is the amber rod becomes charged. Okay, now we are discuss the same with another set of example. That is when a glass rod is rubbed with a silk cloth. So what happens? You are going to rub the glass rod with the silk cloth. The glass rod attracts the pieces of paper. So now what happens? They imagined that the glass rod also has a special property, or it becomes charged. So how the glass rod becomes charged, that we are going to discuss with the example. So when the silk cloth is rubbed with the glass rod, what happens? That the outermost electrons that present in the glass rod is removed. It is because we already know that when we are going to rub our hand, what happens? The heat energy will be liberated. Similarly, in the same manner also, when the silk cloth is rubbed with a glass rod, what happens? The electrons that present in the outermost orbit is removed due to that energy, heat energy that you are going to rub. So by rubbing, energy is released in this also. What happens? Electrons are removed. And we already discussed in your lower classes about that gaining of electrons and losing of electrons. In both the cases, gaining of electrons, it becomes negatively charged particles, that is silk cloth, and removing or losing the electrons, it becomes the glass rod becomes a positively charged particles. Now look at the diagram. So in this case, we are going to discuss about the positively glass rods. So now a rigid support, and you are going to hang that positively glass rod. Now you are going to bring the another positively glass rod together. What happens? It repels each other. Similarly, another negatively charged rubber rod is hanging on that rigid support, and you are going to bring the another negatively rubber rod. What happens? Here also repulsion occurs. And in the third case, one is a positively glass rod and another one is negatively rubber rod. You are going to bring both the rods. So what happens? Attraction will occur. So we discussed it elaborately. So the negatively charged rubber rod and another one is negatively charged rubber rods. What happens if you are going to bring the two charges, negatively charges? What happens? Repulsion occurs. Similarly, in the same manner also, that is the glass rod. If you are going to bring the positive glass rod and another positive glass rod, what happens? Repulsion occurs. And in the third case, that is when charged, negatively charged rubber rod and positively charged glass rod, you are going to bring together. What happens? Attraction occurs. So with this diagrammatic representation, it simply shows that like charges repel each other and unlike charges attract each other. Okay, now in 18th century, Benjamin Franklin, he discussed about the charges and he distinguished the charges as positive and negative charges. So positive charges is indicated by the letter plus Q and negative charge is indicated by the letter minus Q. And after him, later the 19th century and in the beginning of 20th century, yes, that is Judge Thomson and Rutherford concludes that atom is electrically neutral and it is made up of the three particles. One is said to be negatively charged electron and another one is the positively charged proton, and finally we are having the neutrons have the zero charge or the no charge. So the material objects made up of atoms are neutral in nature. So in neutral, you know, in atoms equal number of protons and equal number of electrons we are having. So it neutralizes, it gets neutralizes, and that is said to be generally the objects are electrons, and that is they are neutral in nature. Okay, students. And now that is a simple concept. So we already discussed about this. That is, when an object is rubbed with another object, some amount of energy is transferred from one object to another object due to the friction. So here friction or interactions, that is we already discussed, that is the electromagnetism. So between them and the object is said to be electrically charged. So we already discussed the same case, that is when the glass rod is rubbed with the silk cloth, what happens? Electrons move from glass to the silk cloth. So finally what happens? The glass becomes a positively charged particle and the silk becomes negatively charged particles. And this rubbing process is said to be triboelectric charging. So that is charging the objects through rubbing. Charging the objects through rubbing is called triboelectric charging. And so these are all the introduction and historical development of that electric charges. If you have any doubts in these sessions, that is in introduction and historical background, just contact your queries to the WhatsApp number that is given, and our social networks, that is sriramshanphysics@gmail.com, and in the Facebook and in Twitter, and your doubts will be clarified soon. So take care. We will discuss in the next videos.